I'm Isabella and you're listening to Zeno. Each month I have conversations with people from all walks of life about their personal stories of home, identity and the search for belonging. I'm joined today by Greta Francesca Iori. Greta is an Ethiopian-Italian wildlife crime and conservation advisor to various African governments, international organisations and NGOs with extensive experience trying to bring an end to the illegal wildlife trade, resolve human-wildlife conflict, better understand the gender dynamics of organised criminal networks while encouraging more sustainable, just and inclusive conservation development models across the Horn of Africa. Her current work focuses on championing cross-sectoral collaboration to tackle human-wildlife conflict, driving socio-environmental justice thinking within the conservation arena, and facilitating vital dialogue and research on the power dynamics of women across hierarchies within and around protected area systems in Ethiopia, South Sudan, and Eritrea. Greta, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
How do you answer the question, where are you from? And when you answer that, what truths are missing from that answer?
Wow, what a lovely start to this conversation. So I'm originally Ethiopian-Italian. And now that you've asked me that question, I remember being asked why I always say Ethiopian before I say Italian. So I think that comes from the fact that I was raised the majority of my life in Ethiopia. So I culturally identify myself as Ethiopian. I feel very comfortable as an Ethiopian. My roots and my passions, and as you just mentioned, my work is deeply rooted in the region. But I am Ethiopian and Italian, yeah. I think immediately when someone asks me a question about who I am or where I'm from, I remember the things that matter the most to me. And of course, having grown up and loved and actually defined my identity growing up in Ethiopia, I think it just kind of comes up naturally. But also the Italian side to me comes up because my father, who's also Italian, but he was born and raised in Ethiopia, made it very important for us to know who we are. Like the fact that we are Italian, even though we've never lived there, and the cultural importances of understanding where you're from, despite your physical ability to live in that country.
So it's a nod to your heritage.
Exactly.
So are there truths that are missing from the answer that you give when someone asks you, where are you from?
Absolutely. I think because when you just say where you're from, you never have a chance to go into the depth of or the emotions of what you might feel or how difficult it might have been for you to understand the relationship you hold with where you're from and how that reality has defined you today. And I really believe who you are is a constant shifting cycle. You learn who you are and then you unlearn who you are, depending on what you're doing, depending on who you're engaging with, depending on how you feel. And as we are learning on a global scale, a lot of the things that we've learned are constructed by the societies we belong to. So I think there's always a lot missing. There's a lot of layers missing to who you really are. And even the fact that we identify ourselves as a link to where you're from, like physical, like the country, which at the end of the day is a human construct, not really, if you look at it from a spiritual angle, that doesn't make any sense. So absolutely, there's always a lot missing in that answer question.
You mentioned that there's always this sense of unlearning and relearning and that we go through cycles. What cycle would you say that you're in currently?
I think I've been called very deeply because of the situation of the global pandemic, challenging everything I know with regards to how to make an impact when you have zero ability of being close to the things that you do. Really unlearning systems that we thought were only possible to create impact within, whether that meant physically being there or the entire structure of how we define success, how we define productivity, how we define capitalism and its role in making the world a better place. So I've been going through a deep process of rethinking many things. We've been challenged a lot globally with the reality of climate change. And this has been ongoing for someone like me that works in the environmental sector, but we're seeing it being brought up at the highest level of governance and leadership. So all of a sudden, there are people coming to you asking you, what do you think we should do? This thing is very complicated. And it isn't a black or white answer. It never has been and never will be. But if it was up to you to define a way forward, how would you do it? And that's when you really start realizing how complicated things are. So I've had to really challenge all of my thought beliefs to try and find a solution and find ways that are effectively going to contribute to a way forward, even if it isn't an all-in-all answer. But we need to be able to stop, reflect, and be like, things aren't working. And you can apply this to any sector right now. It's not just environmentalism, it's everything. It's the way we engage with work. I think everyone is so burnt out. Everyone is so exhausted, even those that are working in sectors that they're extremely passionate about. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of us are thinking much deeper now about like, really, what is it all about? What is it all for?
So you feel like the pandemic has fast-tracked this deep inner thinking about things, but also brings with it a lot of more questions. Really.
Absolutely. Exactly. I really think so.
And you mentioned before challenging the social construct of belonging solely being connected to a place or a country. And I know you've spent so much of your life's work and your career like protecting ecosystems in the Horn of Africa. And I just wanted to know, like, what does it mean to you to find belonging or rootedness in a place?
For me, the reason why I've been so called to kind of work in nature and really work at the intersection of how the social construct of life and our social cultural ways of existing play into the broader sense of place and the environment and the land that sustains us has always been super important and, let's say, conflicted for me, because being in Ethiopia, I grew up in the capital. You know, I was very privileged growing up, and I saw how disconnected the city life was from the reality of environmental destruction, but yet how much we took for granted the need to protect the environment around us, and how you would go kind of weekends away and enjoy it for the weekend, and then you'd come back to your city life, which was consumerism and materialism and all of these things that were actually the very fundamentals of the destruction that was happening. But yet we didn't want to take ownership of it. As long as we loved nature, we were good people. So when I started spending a lot of more time within the communities, the indigenous communities, the local communities that were actually safeguarding this environment, but were equally the most oppressed and most marginalized in society, I realized at a very young age how much injustice was playing out in the way that we engage with development, in the way that we engage with our existence, that some very privileged individuals, the elites, the 1%, were able to turn a blind eye, while the rest of people were really struggling a lot. But yet our entire existence depends on what those people are protecting and what those people are taking care of. So going back to your question of a sense of belonging, I had to recognize first and foremost that I was part of the 1%. I was part of that machine that had the privilege to turn away if I wanted to. But there was a deep sense of calling in me that I didn't feel okay belonging to that group. But I also knew that I couldn't impose my views or thoughts on the communities that I was going to spend now 12 years with. And through this process, I understood that the thing that connects us all is the land, the one thing we share in common. We cannot survive without our land, without our ecosystems being healthy. And so it was stripping all of my identity and recognizing that as a human, I was part of a broader ecosystem. And irrespective of my level within society, what made us all the same is that we're part of an ecosystem. And a lot of people have still not woken up to that reality, or they choose to disconnect from that reality because they think they can genuinely exist without the ecosystem. But community and land and returning to the roots of our core existence, which is we are just an ecosystem and we're all interconnected. I think that for me has brought me to the sense of where do I really belong?
Wow, that's so amazing. That's so interesting. There are so many things that you touch on which I think are incredibly important and also very important for where we are right now with the pandemic. And I think so many people who've lived in cities and are doing, office work and are waking up to this deep sense of disconnectedness. And as you say, the machine is like, it is completely constructed. And how sustainable is this idea of escapism where you just go away for the weekend and you see some birds and you come back to work and you're working at your office? But it's so interesting to me that you've looked at this from a really systemic point of view and also being a bridge as well between these two different worlds, right? Because, like, as you say, you had to acknowledge the fact that I am in this 1% and I am from this world, but I also want to understand these communities who are on the front line of this environmental crisis, and how do I facilitate that dialogue between those different spaces? How do you think your work in that space has influenced how you carry yourself day to day and the conversations that you have with people?
So I think the way that it's influenced me is that I'm hyper aware of social constructs and how deeply ingrained beliefs define how people show up in society, how they show up for themselves, how they show up for what they're passionate about. And I've learned to not be judgmental because, and I think this can play out again in anything, whether it's your relation to the land and the climate breakdown we're going through, or racism and diversity and gender and class and religion, everything. The emotions that we hold, and sometimes a lot of the anger, it comes from which side of the coin you were on, right? If you were the oppressor or the oppressor, or if you were the one driving destruction or the one that has to safeguard it on the front lines. And the way that it's helped me understand these conflicts, we're literally social conflicts in every layer of our existence. And it's a question about access. It's a question about privilege. It's a question about evil versus good, because there's people who know that their actions create pain and are able to literally turn off that part of their humanity and just accept it as a consequence of their action rather than something they'd rather avoid. So it's made me become someone that recognizes that there's always going to be duality. And we see that a lot in nature. There is no all good in any system. Sometimes I think humans love to kind of delve into the ideal world of perfect life, and justice often, even if we should always root everything that we do in justice, we will always have to also acknowledge that there will always be duality. There's going to be more justice for some, less for others. And when I question what is the impact that I bring dedicating my life to social environmental justice, where do I want to see myself at the end of my life? I ask myself that a lot. When I look back at my life, where do I really think we will be? So I try and show up in society as someone that accepts that every single small ripple that makes a place better or makes someone more included, feel like they belong more to the society, that they have more access, that their life has been bettered even slightly, that should be celebrated. Because sometimes I think with movements generally, and the fact that we have access to so much information now, we think we can overhaul systems overnight or even in our own lifetime. But having done this work where you have to strip back all expectation and recalibrate yourself to what it means to make progress. And I think nature has taught me that everything happens in its own time. There's no rushing anything. Look at a tree. It takes decades to grow. And through that process, so much of the land changes. Communities change. Histories change. So many things happen. But that tree's still growing, you know? It's helped me show up in a way where I try and pace myself, pace my life, pace my expectations, and in a society that constantly makes you feel like you're not doing enough and trying to rush everything.
Oh, absolutely. And also for the work that you do specifically, you would get burnt out if you had this expectation of, I'm going to solve the climate crisis overnight. It sounds like you've got a sense of realism of what's achievable and what that progress looks like day to day.
I've burnt out so many times, literally, in the last decade, because when you do work that you're passionate about, it's not work. I'm so lucky to be able to do what I do for work, but the passion that stems from it, it's not because I work in it. I made it work because I'm so passionate about it. So it's very important to realize and learn from our own mistakes that with a million things toying at you and the kind of life and structure that we belong to now, to look inward, to reflect, to take deep breaths, because sometimes that's the only place you'll find solace. You'll only find the answers when you start slowing down for yourself. Nobody's going to tell you to slow down, because the more successful you are, the more you're going to be pulled in a million directions. The more people know who you are, the more they'll want you to comment on things. It's like a devil's cycle, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I want to go back to something you said about this duality in nature and in society. I've been reading this book by Sharon Blackie, called If Women Rose Rooted. She writes about women in nature through mythology and in history that we don't hear these stories enough. It's very interesting hearing her perspective in light of what you talk about. So, for example, I believe she maybe has Celtic roots historically in her family. And she talks about women who have fought for the protection of the environment and nature and how that has been in conflict with masculine structures that exist in society. And one area in particular she talks about, which I find very interesting, is the story of Boudica. So Boudica was a very powerful woman. She led a tribe and she was trying to fight against the Romans. And her community, her tribal community, didn't see any distinction between men and women. They saw them as equally as powerful as men could be, whereas the Romans were very against women being in powerful positions. They had this battle, and unfortunately, Boudica's tribe, they did not win against the Romans, and she ended up poisoning herself. And then that led to, the success of the Roman Empire. And these ideas then eventually led to Christianity. And now you see women in stories like Adam and Eve, like you mentioned, this idea of Western cultures thinking about the environment as this perfect place, like the Garden of Eden, that it will always be perfect. You've got nothing to do with it. Whereas like in other kind of mythologies and where women are central to these stories, it is this idea of safeguarding and protection.
Yep.
And there's just this quote that I want to read from the book, which I just think touches on what you talk about. So she says that a growing number of contemporary women's movements are focusing on a new and strongly felt desire to actively reroot ourselves in the land and in our communities, to take responsibility for shaping the future, to bring back awareness of and respect for deep feminine values in a world dominated by the masculine. It's a revolution of belonging, and it goes far beyond simple environmentalism. And I think that just completely encapsulates what you say. And she actually quotes the Dalai Lama as well, who said that the world will be saved by the Western women. And I just thought that was like so funny. And the reason I bring this up is I would love you to talk about, your experience in education, your master's degree, and how that led you to doing the work that you do now on conservation.
Wow. So first and foremost, I think education is incredibly layered in how it can contribute to your career, your passion, and how much is missing in the education structure to really give you the nuance you require to actually work in the spaces like I do in environmentalism in places that are far away. So I studied at King's College London for my master's, and it was incredible because of the fact that there was a lot of diversity in our program. And that was, I feel so privileged to have been around people that had already fully fledged careers, a lot of lived experience, people from all over the world. But of course, that's not always the case, And there are a lot of universities that do not have a lot of diversity, or because of access, because of privilege, because of finance, and the fact that even education is so expensive. I got into the program on a bursary. I had support, but that's not the case for everyone. So I think the way that we learn very much also impacts the programs that we then go into and the way that we also do our work later on. And in the conservation space, this is deeply problematic because the dominant conservation narratives are still upholding neocolonial models of protected area systems and national parks, which were created by colonial systems that till this day are being upheld, which have displaced a lot of local communities. And sadly, the conservation community, although yes, there are many also incredible programs of community-based systems, community-based programs and conservation ideas, at scale, they're still the minority. And you have to start tackling why that is. When we know inherently that the people that belong to those lands for millennia protected the ecosystem better than anybody. But with a history of displacement, with a history of dispossession, of course that they are now also at the front lines of the destruction, because it's a matter of survival for a lot of them. So I think for me personally, that was a very challenging aspect, because you're trying to get a job in a sphere that you're very passionate about, but you're trying to get a job into something that you deeply disagree with. But if you don't do that, and if you don't get your foot in the door, then you don't have a voice. You don't have any way of contributing to bettering it. And personally, the beginning up, especially because I'm Ethiopian and we do not have conservation NGOs working in the country, our governments have a lot of protected areas, but a lot of them do not benefit the local community or the local economy. So it's not given importance. In fact, it's quite ridiculed as an aspect of developing society. So coming from that space with zero guidance in my own country and trying to understand and navigate, how do I bring in this more holistic approach to conservation? Because I believe in it, where I don't think we should just be including communities, but they should actually be driving at the front seat, telling us how to do this. Because if anyone knows how to protect these ecosystems, it's them. But with a society and an arena of work that doesn't accept that yet. So you start realizing how important it is first to find an avenue where you can have a voice, which is very challenging and it isn't straightforward. And then second, within a very, very dominant space, how do you not get labeled the radical one or the unrealistic one or the person that's just trying to make it very difficult to make impact? Because the truth is, yes, conservation does impact a lot of people, whether it's the conservationists or the communities, but there are still a lot of other people that we shouldn't just discard and just celebrate conservation because we're helping a few people. So I'm of the view that the way you're educated, the way that you engage with the work will very much impact the models that are upheld by society, government, and so on. And I don't think we should settle. I don't think we should just celebrate, oh, it's working for a few of us. It's like, yes, we should 100% celebrate that, but we should also be tackling it and be like, how can we make it better for more people? If it's working here, can we re-implement this model somewhere else?
It's interesting you talk about like bringing in these nuanced conversations and ways to move forward, but you're surrounded by this dominant pre-existing narrative which seems immovable. And you're navigating this kind of conflict as well of like needing to get your foot in the door and needing to be in a position of power to be able to have a voice for others. In light of that, like, what are you looking towards in the future? What projects are you working on at the moment where you're tackling these sorts of conflicts?
I think it's almost like you become very, very niche in your passion. You know, you go deep, deep, deep into understanding one thing. For me, it's human-wildlife conflict, human-wildlife coexistence, natural resource conflict, and access, and so on. But then when you get there, you realize that it's all interlinked to the bigger picture, right? That you're not going to be able to resolve these problems in a silo of conservation or environmentalism. That in fact, all of our challenges and all of our injustices are all interlinked. So it's kind of contradictory. You become an expert in one thing, and then you realize that actually you have to go all the way back and be like, how do they all connect? And so it becomes all of a sudden very overwhelming. And for a lot of people, I think that's where we're at right now. Globally, I feel like the interconnectedness of all of our injustices is what's like the most challenging aspect of existing right now. Because we're realizing that we have to uproot the entire system in order to build an amazing society and structure that honors all of our existence, not just humans, but non-humans as well, and all living things, because we have created a system that was never actually meant to do that. It was meant to segregate, divide, exploit, and it was built on a myth that it would always have abundance, that we could just exploit for the rest of existence. But our planet is showing us that that's not possible. So for me, this past year and a half of like slowing down and not being able to be close to my work has forced me to look forward to the future and be like, where do you hold the most value in all the experiences that you've had to try and contribute to that vision, to that dream? And for me, it's really kind of like zooming out and trying to show people that how much we're all interconnected and how we don't all have to be doing the same thing. But if we all start tackling our little piece of the cake, the great mosaic of life, if we're all doing our little piece and trying to make it better and question it and challenge it and start dreaming of ways to redefine it and rebuild it rather than focusing all of our energy on the negative of it. Because without hope, if you get overwhelmed and engulfed by the magnitude of the problem, you'll be crippled. I can promise you there's no way you're going to be able to dream. And I think, how do you dream then? That's the next question. How do you become hopeful again? And that's connecting to things that aren't actually what you're doing for work. So it might be arts, music, things that move your soul, that bring up passion for you, and then relating it to what you want to contribute in our existence. And I see that's what's happening. Millennials especially, they're incredible at this, integrating the arts and culture and music and poetry and anything you can think of that makes us human, and then trying to dream up a more just existence for everybody.
And in light of that idea of how do you dream and how are you hopeful for what's next, what landscapes or cultures or people inspire you right now?
Wow, so many. I'm currently deeply connected to the ancestral world, so ancient histories and ancient civilizations in the areas that I'm from. So I've been spending a lot of time trying to understand ancient Egyptian connection to Ethiopia. And at the time, it was known to be the land of Punt, because I'm trying to understand how people coexisted with wild species back in the day, when there was a lot more large mammals, such as elephants, but like at a larger scale because they weren't on the verge of extinction. And navigating and understanding how those civilizations engaged with their natural world, albeit it being exploitative as well, because that's what you see when you start going into history, that we have always had this dominating narrative of we need to take care of our community, not everybody, in our own different ways. And different civilizations were threatened by each other a lot. But then within that history, within the lines, you also see where they engaged peacefully and in harmony, but it's less spoken about, it's less known about. It's almost like we've always been fascinated by drama in history and we only spoke about devastation and wars. And I'm trying to connect a lot to that because I think there's a lot to be said about who we were before and what did we do better then that we can reintegrate now that we might have lost connection to. And this brings me to also Indigenous communities. A lot of them are under a severe threat because the system we live in does not honor them and the way that they exist and the way that they engage with their environment because they don't abide to a capitalist structure. And for example, they believe in embedded value. They don't believe in capital value only because they don't engage with capital. So when you look at embedded value of something, it's literally saying it deserves to be here just because it's here. Not it deserves to be here because it contributes to our GDP. And so I've been trying to engage more and challenge myself to learn from pre-existing worldviews to try and inform the way forward.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that is just, I think what you said just hits the nail on the head in the sense of this spiritual conflict that we're experiencing now, which has been presented to us through the pandemic at such a global scale, right? What we're all going through collectively, of course, in different ways, is forcing us to come to terms with the existence that we've created through capitalism. And this idea of inherent value is so important. You mentioned Indigenous communities. What languages have you found home in?
I find home in the languages that I was brought up speaking as a child. So that's Amharic, the national language of Ethiopia, Italian, English, and now Spanish, because my husband is Venezuelan, Latin.
Do you feel that you are different in different languages? And the reason why I ask that is for me, I feel like a different side of my personality comes out when I'm using a certain language, or there are certain turns of phrase that you use, or a sense of humor. Do you feel like you occupy different spaces when you use a certain language?
Absolutely. Yes, you're so right. I think because also being mixed race has always been so rooted in people being able to understand that I'm not either fully because of the way that I speak, which I find very fascinating. Like, my father made it a thing to teach my brother and I Italian, even though we'd never lived in Italy, because he felt like language would be the only way that they would accept us when we'd visit. If we had no way of connecting to Italians through language, or if we felt alienated while visiting Italy, he felt that we would reject our Italianness. So he only spoke to us in Italian. He also still, to this day, only speaks to us in Italian because we've never learned Italian formally, just through speaking with him. But what this means is that when we go to Italy, or where we speak with Italians that have grown up in Italy, they immediately mention it within like 10 minutes of speaking with me. They're like, oh, you speak Italian without a Italian accent, you know, or I can't pinpoint which area of Italy you're from, or your Italian is not perfect. And so where are you from? So this immediate recognition that I'm not fully Italian, so that how much of an impact that's had on my thinking of where I'm from. And this also happens with Amharic, because I've also never formally learned Amharic. It was through speaking, because I grew up in Ethiopia, but Amharic has its own scripture, and we never wrote in Amharic because I went to an English school, and therefore I might struggle with some words, or I might say them in a different way. But in Ethiopia, the fact that I was speaking Amharic when I don't look completely Ethiopian was always very celebrated. Like, oh, I'm so proud that you feel like you belong to Ethiopia. You're Ethiopian, you know? And the celebration of like, if you don't, though, you've chosen your other culture or your other ethnicity. So I think language really makes you, like really defines you, as you said, different sides of you. When I'm in the field, I feel very Ethiopian, and I want to speak only Amharic because I want them to feel like I am respecting my roots, and that I want to make them feel comfortable in a language that they speak confidently. And in Italy, I've always been a bit more shy or more conscious of they're going to tell me I'm not from here. And English has been, let's say, my foundational language in the sense of I learned in English, I think in English a lot, and then my professional career was in English. So I think I can express myself best in English. So it's interesting that you say that you have different personas with different languages, because I understand that and believe it too.
Mm. Yeah, I resonate with so much of what you say. And the interesting thing about Italian as well, so there's a Somali-Italian author who I love. Her name is Ijaba Shego. She wrote a book called La mia casa è dove sono, talking about her belonging as a Somali-Italian. And being an author, obviously, and she grew up in Italy. Her command of Italian is so incredible.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see, like, the ripples that she's created in like, her work as an activist and as an author, an Italian author, talking about issues of racism in Italy and that sort of thing. Through her work, I see command of language as a tool. It's a very important tool to illustrate your belonging to a certain culture and illustrate your nuanced understanding of culture, but being able to communicate different ideas. You know, it's like, and I see that in what you're doing as well, because you say like it's important to you that you speak Amharic when you're in the field, when you're dealing with these communities, because you are saying, I understand you. Yeah. Because if you were coming at that from an Italian or English language perspective, the atmosphere would be totally different, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And you see that a lot, don't you? When you see the idea of saviorism, where non-locals are imposing models and ways of thinking on communities that are completely different to them, that don't even exist within their culture. So when you think about charity work, and if you approach it from a non-nuanced way, you immediately realize how dangerous it can be, because you are literally imposing your worldview, your language, your way of showing up in your own culture on such a foreign land that might not want that, but you would have no idea because you're not actually communicating to them in a way that they feel comfortable to communicate with you. And I think this is where we all have to do a lot of deep work and understand our place. And where do we have the ability to, instead of suggesting something, rather let the person in that space suggest and lead, and I can help if I'm asked to. And language is a key driver of that. And also culture, understanding the complexities of culture, tradition, identity, and the many layers of that within communities. So 100%, I think what you say regarding connecting because of language or connecting because of culture and understanding on a deeper level how people connect and engage is vital to any kind of success long term.
It's like key to dialogue.
Yeah.
That's how we have dialogue and understand each other better and how you can coexist properly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then it becomes so much more complicated in my world when you're dealing with non-humans because they can't dialogue, but you know that they have rights and creating space for that as well.
Absolutely. I want to kind of dig a bit more into your sense of belonging. And so what are your earliest memories of feeling like an outsider or feeling different?
I think definitely when traveling. So I was very lucky to go to an international school in Addis. So there was all kinds of children there, all kinds of colors, cultures, Ethiopians, non-Ethiopians. So I felt very much that I belonged in that society. And my family also, both my mother and father, were very open with us about communicating our differences. My mom actually from a very young age was very open with me and my brother about her instances of being discriminated against in Italy. And we were very aware of that. But also they wanted us to connect to both of our identities in order to never feel discriminated against, or even if you were, that you created what you felt connected to within your culture. And I think I really do commend them now as an adult at the fact that they did that so early on, considering, that was a long time ago now. And I think it was a very non-traditional way of raising your children in a very Ethiopian culture where we talked about a lot of things that I know that my friends and others didn't have that open space in their family. But I would say my first encounter with or recognizing that I didn't belong was when we traveled abroad. When all of a sudden I was not white enough, that I didn't belong to the European culture. Or I was told, my curly hair was nicer when it was straightened. And I didn't actually understand what that meant because for me, they were just hairstyles. But all of a sudden, my hair defined my ability to belong to a group of girls. I think I was at a ballet class or something in a summer camp. And of course, we were in Europe, so there was only girls with straight hair. And I had curly hair. And I was told that because my hair was not beautiful or I don't remember what the word was, but it definitely made me feel that way. Like my curly hair was crazy or not elegant, that I had to put it up in a bun. And I remember, well, my hair can't be straightened now because I don't have a hair salon. And since that day, when I then returned to Ethiopia, and this would be a whole other podcast talking about how even in Black societies, we try and become more white by straightening our hair, by bleaching our skin and so on. This is very prominent in Ethiopian culture as well. So I started straightening my hair. I only loved my hair straight because at such a young age, that one experience of being told that my curly hair was not acceptable with the other girls. So that's, I think, my first recollection of that as a child was that moment when it was about my hair.
That's so powerful. And it's so interesting how much symbolism hair has as well. It's like, I'm grateful for things like the Halo Code now, where they're like a charter that companies can sign up to say that we will respect hair that has ethnic, religious significance. So, for example, if you're Sikh and you need to wear a turban and that sort of thing, like respecting different ways of hair, because it's like, as you say, it's completely Western European influenced why people think that you should have your hair like that. It's crazy. It's troubling as well because it's such a kind of, it's a self-flagellating thing. You're destroying your body in a way. It's like having to change your physical makeup in order to fit a norm that had never had space for you. So it's incredibly powerful to take that back and to see that it is beautiful. Yeah.
It's so interesting. I agree. And at the time when I was then later in life, when I was a teen and I started rejecting straight hair and at the time I had no idea, we weren't this conscious of all the systems of oppression. And of course we had a lot of unlearning to do then. And I've done a lot of it only now at later stage in my life when I've been exposed to more information. But it's also triggered me to deeply think about my life and how I showed up or how I upheld systems of oppression myself, or I contributed to them because that's how I was engaging with society in spaces that only wanted to see that one worldview. Because when I turned 19, I was in university in the Netherlands. And at the time, I didn't think of it as a radical move, but I decided to shave my head. I got that idea because I was working in a cafe, like any university student, trying to make a living on evenings and afternoons when I wasn't studying. And all the other girls that were working there were European, and they had beautiful hair. But one day I came with my curly hair, and I was told it was not professional, which you hear a lot about now. And I had to always wear a net, I was told, because my hair was going to fall out and theirs wasn't. And I thought,
that's so irrational.
It's all hair. But that made me feel that's another moment I remember. And it's funny that it's always linked to hair, because I think that's what defines, as a mixed race individual, what doesn't make me fully Italian is my hair, because it's very curly. And now I'm very proud. It's one of the things that I love the most about my body. But I think it's the one thing that doesn't make me fit in, in a Western European culture. Because they're like, you surely can't be Italian, even if you're very light skinned. So then I decided to shave my hair. And I remember telling my mom, because my mom has always had short hair. And I was like, Mom, why have you never grown out your hair? And, it was at that time that for the first time that I realized she probably doesn't have long hair, because she might not even know it, but she didn't want to deal with the discrimination against her. So having short hair for her, without her even realizing it, was a way of just belonging to her society, not having to straighten it, not having to conform, even though she was living in Ethiopia. And now we recently talked about it, because, now she's so proud that I have my hair curly. And every time I talk about cutting it, she's like, no, but I love it. And it's so much like you, and everyone identifies you as you, the curly hair Greta. And then we talked about it. I was like, why have you ever thought about why you've never grown out your hair? We had a deep conversation. And I kind of probed the question of, do you think it's because I think a lot of the previous generations don't have the privilege that we do, where you can openly talk about really challenging things because of stigma, because of culture. And I'm trying to do that more with my parents, to give them, and older generations, to give them the safe space that we're very lucky to have, that they didn't have. This ability to really go inwards and question why you might have shown up for yourself in a certain way. Was it because you were just trying to survive in a very violent system against you? And it's been transformational for me to understand my parents as human beings and the difficulties that they've gone through, and how much they belong in certain spaces has impacted me. So really going deeply into understanding, and it links back to the work that I'm trying to do with ancestry and trying to understand who I am and who we are as humanity as a whole. It's really fascinating.
Absolutely. And I love this idea of that you say it's a privilege that we have these safe spaces now to talk about these things, which our parents and generations before us didn't have. It's very interesting to think about it as a privilege. I think that's the first time I've heard about it spoken about in that way. And I think it's probably the best way that we can come to terms with our parents' generation and what they've done. I mean, I'm talking about neoliberal systems and where we are now. Yeah. That's the only way that you can come to terms with what they've gone through and heal that intergenerational trauma. Going back to what you said about, your hair and shaving it off and then also accepting your natural hair. Mm-hmm. It's so interesting when the things that you are marginalized for then become your most loved assets, right? For me personally, I always felt bad about having freckles because my dad's ginger and my mum's Filipino, and I go to the Philippines and that was always a point of contention, the fact that I had freckles, because it's better to have clear skin, whiter skin, get out of the sun, stay away from the sun. You don't want more freckles. And I used to feel horrible about the fact that I had them. And now I feel like I really embrace them because of that. And I think it's such a powerful moment when you have that awareness of why people disagree with a certain aspect of your being, and then you accept it yourself. It's a pretty amazing feeling, actually.
Absolutely. And I will say, I'm still at least I really recognize how much privilege I hold in so many spaces. Like, for example, I will have been discriminated a lot less than my mother because she has kinky hair. Or if you're dark skinned, you will be even more discriminated than my mother, who's more fairer in the being Ethiopian. But also being able-bodied, all the things that I'm able to do because of the different layers and complexities of discrimination, right? And I think going back to how do we heal ourselves and how do we heal those before us? And how do we create spaces of where do we go from here? It's really all rooted in love. And I really fundamentally believe that, because I remember reading somewhere, a psychologist said that our like longing and need for belonging is almost on par with our need for love. And those two are 100% interlinked. So if you think about, in an ideal world, there was no discrimination, if there was no oppression, there was no pain, how would it look? It would literally be if we all just loved each other deeply, the way we love those that are in relationship with us. But imagine you had that love for even the stranger, even the person that looks polar opposite to you, and you didn't define them based on what they look like, but you just love them for existing. That's kind of, I think, the only way we'll reach there is by really healing our preconceived stereotypes and ideas that value of someone or the purpose of someone is outside anything to do with just existing. And if you really think about love, it's like the hardest thing to define. Why do you love something? Or why do you love somebody? Or why do you love certain things in life? You really don't know. You just do a lot of times. And especially in relationships, those people might even hurt you and you still find a way to love them and forgive them. So when it comes to humanity, recognizing that a lot of people have been hurt and didn't have the avenues to heal or to dialogue or to openly speak about that pain and find reconciliation, or to be able to understand, listen, I've been hurt. I've felt like you've hurt me on this and I want to know why, but I don't want it to do it to you either. They haven't been given that space. They haven't been given the tools. They haven't been given the safe space to openly express their pain. And that's why I think having conversations like this, not just with us who are kind of tasked to find solutions going forward, but really those before us who still hold a lot of power over how the world works. And it can only happen in a safe space, which means no judgment. It can only happen in an area that you're willing to accept different worldviews. Because it doesn't mean that you having the conversation is going to end up like creating a perfect, loving relationship between your elders. There might be a lot of conflict there. But if that conflict is worked through in love, being like, I accept that your worldview is different to mine, but it isn't working for the world right now. So how do we meet each other halfway? How do we compromise? And this goes back to conflict mediation. You can't go into conflict mediation saying, my opinion is the right one. So I'm actually just trying to bring you into my opinion, into my space. It's literally saying there's a neutral zone. We are both currently not in it. How do we get there and collaborate?
I couldn't agree more with everything that you said, honestly. The need for safe space for intergenerational dialogue is so important.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
And just the safe space to be able to learn together, because everyone is learning in a different way and at a different pace.
Yeah.
Just as an example, I was part of a learning community talking about ideas behind home and belonging, which I'd mentioned to you. But we were of our group, there were 6 of us, and we were of all the different ages. And we had one deep discussion about gender identity and talking about the importance of pronouns. And some older generations, they want to be able to ask the question, why are these so important to you? Because some people have no idea. Some people, it just doesn't make sense to them. But why do you need they? Like, why can't you just have he or she? Is that not good enough? And it's so important to just have these safe spaces to be able to talk it through, empathize with each other and understand why it's important, why it might have an impact on someone else that has a completely different life experience to you. And it's only when we create these safe spaces to have this dialogue and ask these difficult questions, these political questions, that we can actually understand each other and move forward.
Absolutely. And also, they make you uncomfortable, especially when they're challenging your worldview and possibly also making you wake up to for the first time to the idea that you've been hurting a lot of people with this worldview. And this is something that is across the difficulties in our current existence, not just race and diversity or the movement for LGBTQ people. It's just, you really have to recognize that safe space is the only way we're going to move forward, because if you're not allowing people to work through their discomfort, to be like, I don't yet understand it, but I understand that I'm hurting you. So I want to not hurt you. Because I've never actually met the people that we all, like really in my inner circle, a lot of people are good people. But they might also still be harming other people. They're not actively trying to harm anyone. A lot of the people in the world are actually good. Inherently, I really believe that a majority of us exist from a place of love, but we belong to a system that constantly makes us focus on blaming others instead of being reflective, instead of admitting failure. And I think that's so important. It's interlinked to the fact that perfectionism is what is always the goal, rather than saying life is trial and error. And if we actually admitted that systems can be built with a good intention but still be harmful, and as long as we're able to admit it and dismantle them as quickly as we built them, then that's fine. Yeah. That's what we need to be championing as the youth, as the people that are going to have to be undoing so much. It's not about using the same system of rigidness that the former generations had, that it was black or white. This is how you show up at work. You work between 9 to 5. You're not successful if you're not earning this much. It's literally creating and fostering flexibility, not only in the way that we work and the way that we engage, but also in the way that we think, that we can also change our mind. When you're presented with new information, when you're aware of something new, when you have a great idea, when you've been exposed to new culture, new worldview, I think we need to honor and celebrate that more rather than being conscious or awakened or woke. As there's literally, I'm seeing it on the social media spaces that I engage with.
Even within the woke movement,
so even within the woke movement, you're starting to see hierarchies within, I know more. You don't know. How could you make a comment on that? You're not well versed in this space, so why are you showing up here? And this cancel culture we're seeing, where when one person makes one mistake, they're literally erased from, or like attacked and bullied for just trying to understand something better. It's really tough. And that's where we need to heal. We need to stop trying to fix everything quickly and rather slow down and recognize this is going to take a long time. And holding space, safe space, compassion, love, empathy is the only way we're going to create a movement of genuine transformation. And it's linked to everybody that's existing in this time. And that's why it's as exciting as it is terrifying.
This whole idea of like cancel culture, this idea of virtue signaling, it's very this human need to demonstrate who is more virtuous than the other. But then again, that keeps playing into the us versus them dichotomy. Ultimately, we are increasingly coming into contact with people who are different from us. And we need to be able to hold space better for each other. I want to ask, what does home taste, sound, smell, and feel like for you?
Ooh, that's so tough. I've never thought about that. Home. Wow. Sound for sure. I think sound for me is a big one, because sounds of nature is home, sounds of the ocean, sound of me breathing while I'm diving. It's a sense of home that I feel very comfortable in. Taste, I think my upbringing plays a lot into that. Ethiopian food, Italian food, like childhood memories of my mother and father cooking for us. I think that definitely childhood when it comes to food. Smell. Wow, smell. I love smell, actually. I'm a big person with regards to scent, like candles and perfume. I love perfume because it reminds me of myself in a way, because I've always changed my scents. Sometimes I'm really into musky things. Sometimes I'm into citrusy things, depending on my mood, depending on what excites me, depending on the season. I think home is a shifting place when it comes to smell, scents, because it depends on what I'm feeling, which is always changing. So home is almost always changing. I would have never imagined that I would call London home. And it is one of my homes now, because I built a home here with my husband. So when I come back here, when it used to be just a complete foreign place to me a couple of years ago, now holds a safe space. I feel so calm when I'm here because it reminds me of home with my husband, a love story, working through my identity, my culture, from a distance, defining who I am in the world, my career, my passion. I cultivated that here. So I really think home is an ever-shifting place.
You mentioned smell. You're particularly drawn to smell. Do you have any memories associated with that?
I'm not sure, I think the citrusy one, I don't know why. It might be because I love summer, like most people. And I love the smell of lemon reminds me of just a hot summer's day, a lemonade. And it just reminds me of things that bring me a lot of joy. We grew up in a landlocked country, so we didn't really engage with the ocean very much until later in life when we started traveling. But I love the ocean. I feel like I'm returning home there, even though I didn't grow up there.
I feel the same way.
And it's strange because then it's all of a sudden you're like, why do I feel so connected to it? Is it because I never had it and it's this place of wonder? Or is it because I actually many lifetimes ago belonged in these places? And what does it mean spiritually for me? So I think anything citrusy reminds me of island life and this ease around water bodies and summer and warmth and Mediterranean temperatures and climates, which again, I'm learning are a big part of myself and my identity through my Italian culture and roots. And I found out dialoguing with my father that my grandmother came from an island from Sardinia, and she was very proud, but she moved very young during the war to Eritrea. But the one thing she longed the most and missed the most was that Italian culture, which was obviously being reproduced through the colonial roots of Italians in Eritrea, but it was not the same as where she grew up with her family in Sardinia. And so maybe that's where it's coming from and coming up for me from, So yeah, scents are an interesting one, definitely.
Wow, that's beautiful. There's something so natural and calming about the ocean and seaside, and where land meets water is something so powerful about that space, I think.
Yes, it's just magical how it always reminds you how small you are. Any natural landscape, really, whether it's a massive valley or a mountain or the ocean or rivers, you all of a sudden, you're reminded of scale, and you're reminded of you're only one part of this entire space. And I think that's why we feel so calm in it. All of a sudden, the weight of the world is not on you. You feel like you belong to something bigger than you.
What advice would you give to others who find themselves unsure of where they belong or where they fit in?
Sometimes the thing that has helped me the most is actually not actively trying to belong, and rather than trying to find your community and trying to fit in to whatever construct it is that you want to find a sense of belonging, stopping and trying to instead look inwards and define that for yourself in the current space you find yourself in. Because I've found that my sense of belonging has changed. It's ever evolving. Where I belonged 10 years ago, I might not feel like I belong right now. So in a way, having this fluid relationship with the sense of belonging and appreciating that you might live many life cycles in your one life has given me a lot of peace, that I don't need to define where I belong. It's less a statement, it's rather a sense of being. And trying to cultivate that, where you're at peace with where you are and who you are in this current moment, is far more powerful, and it's given me far more peace than trying to belong in different spaces, whether it's my identity, my culture, my work. I think there's a lot that overlaps, and that you will belong more in certain spaces sometimes, and you'll belong less in others and other times. And that's okay. And I feel like if we all accepted that, then we would engage with each other so much better. There would be a lot more inclusivity and appreciation for diversity in belonging itself.
That's beautiful. I think that's so powerful. It's someone once told me this statement really resonated with me, like belonging is asserted. It's not something that you gain from other people. It's not something that you wait to be accepted by other people. It's something that you have within yourself. And I think what you said really hones in on that, because it's this idea of how you are in this world, how you be in this world and how you exist, because that transcends any label or association that you might have with a particular place or a community.
Absolutely. It's going back to our core, that existing is enough. You don't have to be or do anything to have value, to value yourself, to love yourself, to belong where you are. Because I think sometimes that in itself is the reason we lose a sense of who we are. Because we're, like you said, we're trying to label it. Just return to the roots of your existence, which is we're here for such a short time in the grander scheme of things. As long as we know it in the current form that we know it, we don't know what happens after you leave this lived experience. But what I do know is that sometimes we spend our entire life trying to define it. And at the end of it, we realize that the experience itself was actually the main part. And, just being.
Just be here.
Just be here. That's all that matters at the end.
If someone wants to keep an eye out for what you do and future projects, where can they find you?
So the best place to follow my work is on Instagram, which is my full name, at Greta Francesca Iori, or on Twitter, which is the Ethiopian. So those are the spaces where I speak most about my thoughts, my thinking, my work, my passions.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
You've been listening to Zeno. To stay up to date with our monthly episodes, you can sign up to our newsletter at zenocast.org or follow us on Instagram at @Zeno_pod. Our theme music is composed by Alex Julian Edwards.